It was a calm and sunny afternoon in a small suburban town where life moved slowly, like the breeze that touched the trees. The streets were quiet and most people were either returning from work or school. Among them was a 15-year-old boy named Ethan Miller. He carried a backpack slung over one shoulder, his headphones resting around his neck and his old sneakers tapping softly against the sidewalk. Ethan wasn't the kind of boy who stood out in a crowd. He was polite, soft-spoken, and always tried to avoid trouble. But deep inside, he had a strong sense of right and wrong, something his parents had taught him since he was little. That afternoon, Ethan decided to stop by the local grocery store before heading home. His mom had asked him to pick up some milk and bread, and maybe a pack of eggs if they weren't too expensive. The store wasn't far, just a few blocks away, and Ethan liked walking there because it gave him a little time to think. He often imagined stories in his head about adventures, heroes, and doing brave things. He never thought he would one day be part of a story like that himself. As he walked into the grocery store, the little bell above the door jingled. The familiar sound made him smile. The shop was bright and filled with the warm smell of fresh bread from the bakery section. A few people were shopping quietly, pushing their carts down the aisles. Ethan greeted the cashier, Mrs. Lewis, who had known him since he was a child. "Hey, Ethan," she said kindly. "Your mom sent you again?" He nodded and smiled back. He walked through the aisles, humming softly to himself, unaware that this ordinary trip to the store would soon turn into something unforgettable. He picked up a loaf of bread and a carton of milk, checking the price tags carefully the way his mom had taught him. He didn't come from a rich family, but they were honest and hardworking. Ethan respected that. He always tried to help his parents in small ways, carrying groceries, fixing things, or running little errands like this. As he made his way toward the checkout, he heard raised voices near the entrance. At first he ignored them, thinking it was just a small argument. But the voices grew louder, sharper, filled with laughter that didn't sound friendly at all. Curious, Ethan turned his head slightly to see what was happening. Near the front of the store stood an elderly couple, probably in their 70s. The man had a walking stick, and the woman held a small grocery basket filled with vegetables. They looked gentle and kind, like someone's grandparents. But what caught Ethan's attention was that two young men, maybe in their 20s, were standing in front of them, smirking and mocking them. One of the men said something rude about how slow the old man was moving, and the other laughed loudly. People nearby glanced over but quickly looked away, pretending not to see. Ethan felt a strange twist in his chest. He had seen people being unkind before, but this was different. The old couple looked scared and embarrassed. The woman bent down to pick up a fallen apple, and one of the men kicked it further away, laughing again. The old man tried to say something, but his voice shook. Ethan froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He was just a boy. What could he possibly do against two grown men? He looked around, hoping someone else would step in. But everyone stayed quiet. Some pretended to check their phones, others just turned away. The world suddenly felt cold to Ethan. He remembered something his father always told him. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Those words echoed in his mind. Louder than the laughter of the bullies, Ethan's heart started pounding. He could feel his palms sweating, but something stronger than fear was growing inside him. Anger mixed with courage. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He took a deep breath, slowly walked closer, and stopped a few steps behind the young men. He could hear them clearly now, their cruel jokes cutting through the quiet store. The elderly woman tried to hold back tears while her husband put a shaking arm around her shoulders. Ethan's mind raced. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even know what he was going to say, but he knew he had to say something. He clenched his fists, took another breath, and prepared himself to speak. The world seemed to slow down for a moment. The hum of the store faded. The light from the glass doors reflected off the floor, and Ethan felt his heart thump in his ears. He looked at the old couple, then at the bullies, and something inside him clicked. It wasn't about being brave or being noticed. It was simply about doing what was right. This was the kind of moment he had imagined in the stories he made up. Except now, it was real. And though he didn't know it yet, this single choice, to stand up for two strangers, would change everything about his life. By the time he left that store, Ethan Miller would no longer be just another quiet boy from a small town. He was about to become someone whose story would be remembered. all starting from one ordinary afternoon that turned extraordinary. Ethan stood frozen for a few seconds, watching the scene unfold just a few meters away. The cheerful background music of the grocery store played softly, completely out of place with what was happening at the entrance. The two young men seemed to enjoy the attention they were getting, though most people were pretending not to look. One of them wore a red cap turned backward and a loud grin that didn't reach his eyes. The other had tattoos along his arm and a smirk that made him look even meaner. The elderly man, Mr. Parker, had dropped a small paper bag filled with apples. One of them rolled across the floor, bumping into the shoe of the guy in the red cap. Instead of helping, he stepped on the apple, crushing it under his foot. "Old people shouldn't even be out shopping," he sneered. "Go sit at home before you break something." Mrs. Parker gasped softly, her hand shaking as she reached down to pick up the bag. Her husband bent to help, but his knees trembled. The cruel laughter of the young men echoed in the store. It was the kind of sound that made your heart twist, sharp, mocking, and cold. A few customers stopped and stared, then quietly moved on, pretending it wasn't their problem. Even the cashier hesitated but didn't step forward. No one wanted to get involved. Ethan's chest felt tight. Every part of him wanted to walk away to avoid the trouble, but his heart wouldn't let him. His father's words replayed in his mind like a quiet whisper. "Son, when you see something wrong, silence makes you part of it." He took a deep breath and walked closer, his footsteps soft but steady. His fingers gripped the straps of his backpack tightly as if that gave him courage. When he was close enough, he spoke, his voice clear but firm. "Hey, stop that." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the air like a knife. The two men turned, surprised. The boy in the red cap frowned. "What did you just say, kid?" Ethan swallowed hard, his heart racing, but he didn't back away. "I said stop," he repeated, this time louder. "You shouldn't treat them like that. They didn't do anything to you." The older man straightened slightly, his eyes widening in disbelief. Mrs. Parker looked at Ethan as if she couldn't believe someone had finally spoken up. The taller of the two men stepped closer, towering over Ethan. "And who are you, huh? Some hero," he mocked. "You should mind your own business, boy." Ethan could feel his knees shaking, but he stood his ground. "Maybe you should mind yours," he said, his voice trembling slightly but filled with courage. The crowd that had been pretending not to watch now started paying attention. A few people took out their phones quietly, ready to record if things went bad. The bullies noticed this too, and their expressions changed. The smirk on the man's face began to fade as he realized people were now staring at him, instead of ignoring the situation. Mrs. Parker placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder gently. "Please, it's okay," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to get involved." But Ethan shook his head. "No, ma'am. They can't talk to you like that." Something about the boy's calmness made even the rude men hesitate. Maybe it was the innocence in his face or the strength in his eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the man in the red cap cursed under his breath and kicked aside another apple. "Whatever. Let's go. Not worth it." His friend grumbled something and followed him out, both of them shoving past the automatic doors. The silence that followed felt like a weight being lifted. Everyone in the store seemed to exhale at once. A few people started murmuring. That boy was brave. Good for him. About time someone said something. Ethan's heart was still pounding, but he managed a small, shaky smile. The old couple turned to him with tears of gratitude in their eyes. "Thank you, son," Mr. Parker said softly, his voice trembling. "You didn't have to do that." Ethan shrugged lightly, trying to act calm. "It was the right thing to do," he said. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that." Mrs. Parker gently patted his arm. "Your parents raised you well," she said, her eyes warm and kind. "You remind me of our grandson." Ethan helped them pick up the fallen groceries, carefully placing the apples back into their bag, even the ones that were a little bruised. The old man smiled weakly and tried to hand Ethan a few dollars as thanks, but Ethan shook his head. "It's okay, sir," he said softly. "I just wanted to help." As they left, Mrs. Parker turned back and gave him one last smile. It was a smile full of emotion, gratitude, relief, and respect. Ethan didn't realize then that that smile would stay in his memory for a long time. When he finally walked back to the counter to pay for his milk and bread, the cashier leaned forward and whispered, "That was really brave of you." "Ethan, Not many would have done that. Ethan simply nodded, a little embarrassed. He didn't feel like a hero. He had just done what felt right. But as he stepped out of the store and felt the sun on his face, a strange feeling washed over him. He had no idea that this small act of courage would reach far beyond that grocery store. He couldn't have known that someone else had seen what happened, and that by the next morning, a black SUV would be parked in front of his house, waiting to change his life forever. Ethan had never imagined that a single afternoon could feel so heavy and so alive at the same time. The grocery store was quiet now, the harsh laughter of the bullies gone, but the weight of the moment still lingered. He watched the elderly couple carefully rearranging their groceries, trying to act composed despite the fear and embarrassment that had filled their eyes just moments ago. And then it hit him. Standing up for them had been just the first step. There was more he needed to do, more courage he needed to summon, even if he didn't yet fully understand it. It was strange. Ethan had always been a quiet boy, the kind who stayed in the background, never seeking attention. But in that moment, something inside him felt alive, almost electric. His heart pounded not with fear alone, but with a sense of purpose. For the first time, he realized bravery wasn't about fighting or proving yourself to others. It was about doing what was right, even when it scared you. He stepped closer to the elderly couple. "Are you both okay?" he asked gently. His voice was calm, steady, the kind that seemed to cut through the tension that had hung over the store like a cloud. Mr. Parker looked up, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his walking stick. We'll be fine," he said, trying to sound confident but failing to hide the relief in his voice. Mrs. Parker nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Ethan noticed the small things, the woman's hands shaking as she held her bag, the old man's breath coming a little faster than normal, the slight quiver in his shoulders. It made him realize how much courage it took for them to just be there. In that moment in public, despite knowing the world could be cruel, he felt a surge of admiration for them. If anyone deserved to be treated with respect, it was them. Then, as if on instinct, he reached down and picked up the apple that had rolled furthest across the floor. It was slightly bruised, but still edible. He handed it back to Mrs. Parker with a soft smile. "Here, it's okay. Don't worry about it." Her hand brushed against his, and Ethan felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun streaming through the store windows. It was gratitude, pure and unspoken. The bullies were gone, but the impression they left was still heavy in the air. Ethan realized that courage didn't end with the act itself. Courage was also about being present afterward, making sure the harm didn't linger. He stayed with them, helping them carry the remaining groceries to their cart. With every step, his confidence grew, not in himself, but in the simple truth that kindness could make a difference. "What's your name, young man?" Mr. Parker asked finally, his voice soft but firm. "Ethan," he replied. "Ethan," the man said, nodding slowly. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." There was a pause, a moment where the weight of those words sank in. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He only shrugged slightly, not out of pride, but because he truly didn't feel like he had done anything extraordinary. In his heart, he had simply done what he knew was right. Mrs. Parker gave him a small, trembling smile.
"You remind me of my grandson," she said softly.
"He's about your age, but I doubt he would have the courage to do what you did." Ethan smiled faintly, feeling both shy and proud. For a brief moment, the store seemed to shrink around them. It was no longer just a place to buy groceries. It had become a stage for something far bigger than any of them had expected. As they slowly moved toward the exit, Ethan walked beside them, keeping a protective distance. Every step felt significant, as if the world itself had shifted slightly, acknowledging the courage it takes to defend someone who can't defend themselves. A few bystanders glanced at him, some nodding slightly in approval, others simply whispering to each other. For the first time, Ethan realized that standing up for what is right isn't about recognition. It's about the ripple effect your actions create. When they reached the doors, Mrs. Parker turned to him again. "Ethan, if there's ever anything we can do to thank you, please tell us." Her voice was filled with sincerity, and Ethan shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am," he said, his tone firm. "You don't owe me anything, I wanted to help." Mr. Parker placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture both gentle and powerful. "Sometimes, young man, the smallest actions have the biggest impact. You've reminded us that there are still good people in the world. Ethan nodded, feeling a strange mixture of humility and pride. He didn't feel like a hero, yet he knew that what he had done mattered. He watched the couple walk slowly toward their car, supporting each other, and felt a deep satisfaction that came not from reward or recognition, but from the knowledge that he had made a real difference in someone's life. As he turned to leave, heading toward the checkout counter to pay for the items he had picked up, Ethan felt something shift inside him. That afternoon, something had awakened. A quiet courage, a willingness to stand up for what is right no matter the risk. He had taken the first step into a story much larger than himself, one that would unfold in ways he could never have imagined. And though he didn't know it yet, that courageous stand would set off a chain of events that would lead to something extraordinary, something that would arrive at his doorstep the very next day wrapped in mystery, symbolized by a sleek black SUV waiting to recognize the bravery of a 15-year-old boy who simply did the right thing. After the bullies had left, the store seemed quieter than ever. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint smell of baked bread filled the air, but the atmosphere had changed. Ethan stayed a few steps behind the elderly couple, watching them carefully. Mr. Parker adjusted his walking stick while Mrs. Parker carefully held her grocery bag, as if afraid it might fall again. Their faces were a mixture of relief, embarrassment, and gratitude. Ethan didn't know what to say at first, and he felt awkward standing there, suddenly aware of how small and young he looked in comparison to their presence. Then Mrs. Parker spoke, her voice soft and shaky but full of emotion. "Young man, we don't know how to thank you," she said, her eyes glistening. Ethan shook his head quickly, brushing off the words. "It's okay, ma'am, really, I didn't want to see anyone get hurt," he replied, his voice steady, though he could feel his heart still racing. Mr. Parker's eyes softened as he looked at Ethan, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out. Most people would have walked away. "But you didn't. You stood up for us. That takes courage. More than I've seen in many grown men." Ethan's cheeks flushed slightly. He had never thought of himself as brave. He had only acted on instinct, the way his parents had taught him to. That when you see someone in need, you help. Mrs. Parker reached into her purse and pulled out a small pack of candy. "At least take this," she said with a weak smile. "It's not much, but please, just accept it." Ethan looked at her and shook his head politely. "Thank you, ma'am, but really, I don't need it. I'm just glad you're okay." Still, the couple insisted, handing him the small pack of candy anyway. It felt strange to receive something in return for simply doing what felt right, but Ethan accepted it, placing it carefully in his pocket. The gesture wasn't about the candy itself. It was about their attempt to show gratitude, to honor the courage they had witnessed. For a moment, all three stood silently, the weight of the moment settling over them. Ethan could see the relief in their eyes, the unspoken acknowledgement that someone had finally seen their struggle and chosen to help. Mrs. Parker smiled faintly, brushing a loose strand of gray hair behind her ear. "You remind me of our grandson," she said, almost as if speaking to herself. "He's about your age, but he's not as brave as you are." Ethan smiled politely, unsure what to say. Mr. Parker leaned slightly on his walking stick and sighed. "You've restored a little faith in humanity today," he said quietly. "It's rare to see someone stand up for what's right without expecting anything in return." Ethan nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He didn't do it for recognition or praise, but hearing that he had made a difference, that feeling was something he would never forget. They began to move toward the exit slowly. Ethan walked beside them, helping carry a small grocery bag that had become slightly heavy for Mrs. Parker. Each step felt deliberate, as if this ordinary walk through a store had transformed into something far greater. The couple's gratitude wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was tangible, filling the space around them like a quiet light. As they reached the doors, Mrs. Parker stopped and turned to Ethan again. "You've done more than you know, young man," she said softly. "I hope life treats you kindly. You deserve it." Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered, unsure why the words sounded so small compared to everything he was feeling inside. Mr. Parker added, "Remember, sometimes it's the small acts of courage that make the biggest difference. Never forget that, Ethan." The boy nodded again, feeling the weight of those words. For a moment, he realized that bravery wasn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about simply stepping forward when others turned away, about standing for someone who couldn't stand for themselves. As the elderly couple walked slowly toward their car, Ethan felt a strange sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about reward or recognition. It was about knowing he had done the right thing. And yet somewhere deep inside he felt a flicker of curiosity, a whisper of anticipation. He had a sense, though he didn't yet understand it fully, that this day was only the beginning of something far bigger than himself. He watched as they disappeared into the parking lot, leaning on each other, careful with every step. For the first time that afternoon, Ethan felt a calm satisfaction settle over him. The fear, the adrenaline, the awkwardness, all of it had transformed into something rare and quiet, the knowledge that he had made a real difference in someone's life. Ethan walked back to the checkout counter slowly, still holding the small pack of candy. "Mrs. Lewis," the cashier looked at him with curiosity. "That couple? Did something happen?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly, unsure how to explain everything in a few words. "Just help them," he said simply. "That's all." She nodded, but her eyes showed understanding, as if she knew exactly what he meant. Sometimes the smallest acts could feel like the largest adventures, and sometimes a quiet afternoon could become unforgettable. Ethan paid for his items, gathered his backpack, and stepped out into the fading sunlight. The world seemed the same, yet everything had shifted slightly, as if the universe had noticed the courage of a 15-year-old boy and decided that it deserved something more. He had no idea what that something more would be. But deep down, a small voice told him that the story wasn't over. The gratitude of the couple, the warmth in their eyes, the weight of their words, all of it would stay with him forever, guiding him toward the next chapter of his life, the next choice, the next act of courage that would define who he truly was. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink, as Ethan walked home from the grocery store. The streets were quiet now, with only the occasional hum of a car passing in the distance or the faint laughter of children playing in a nearby yard. The air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint aroma of dinner wafting from houses along the street. Everything seemed ordinary, almost peaceful, yet Ethan felt an energy within him that he couldn't quite explain. His backpack felt heavier than usual, though it was only filled with a loaf of bread, milk, and the small pack of candy from Mrs. Parker. It wasn't the weight of the groceries that bothered him. It was the weight of the day, the moments that had unfolded in the grocery store, and the realization that something inside him had changed. He had stood up for someone in need. He had faced fear and uncertainty and had chosen courage. And now as he walked down the familiar sidewalks, the significance of what he had done began to sink in. The house came into view, bathed in the warm glow of the porch light. Ethan slowed his pace, almost hesitant to enter. Inside, everything smelled like home. The faint aroma of his mother's cooking mingled with the soft sound of his father reading in the living room. The ordinary comfort of it all contrasted sharply with the extraordinary events of the afternoon. He knew his parents would be proud, but he wasn't entirely sure how to explain what had happened. How do you tell your parents that a simple act of kindness had felt like the most important thing in the world? His mom, noticing him on the porch, opened the door and smiled. "Hey, Ethan. How was the store?" she called out, her voice carrying a warmth that made him feel safe. He stepped inside, placing the groceries on the counter. "It was fine," he said, though his tone didn't capture the storm of emotions inside him. His father looked up from his book, eyebrows raised. "Fine, huh? That sounds like there's more to the story," he said gently. Ethan sighed and sank into a chair, rubbing his hands together. Slowly, he recounted the events, the bullies, the elderly couple, the moment he had stepped forward. His parents listened in silence, their faces shifting from curiosity to pride. They had always known Ethan had a strong heart, but hearing him describe the fear, the hesitation, and the courage it had taken made them see him in a new light. "You did the right thing." "Ethan," his father said finally, his voice quiet but firm, "it's not easy to stand up when everyone else turns away. Most people wouldn't have even tried." His mom nodded, reaching over to squeeze his shoulder. "We're proud of you, honey. Really proud. But you must remember, sometimes kindness comes with responsibility. You've set an example today, not just for others, but for yourself. Ethan nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. He hadn't acted for praise or recognition. He had acted because it was the right thing to do. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something beyond his understanding. It was as if the universe had taken note of his courage, quietly preparing a response he couldn't yet see. The evening unfolded slowly. Dinner was a quiet affair, filled with soft conversation and the occasional laughter. But Ethan's thoughts kept drifting back to the Parker couple. He thought about their grateful smiles, the warmth in their eyes, and the way they had insisted on giving him the small pack of candy. It wasn't about the candy itself, it was about the acknowledgement, the recognition that his choice had mattered. Later, as he climbed into bed, the room was dark except for the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. Ethan lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day over and over in his mind. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a quiet, reflective energy. He felt both exhausted and alive, as if the day had aged him in wisdom but also awakened something new inside him, a courage he hadn't realized he possessed. Sleep didn't come immediately. His mind wandered to the possibilities that lay ahead, to the ripple effects of his actions. Could one small act of bravery really matter that much? Could it somehow reach farther than he imagined, touching lives in ways he couldn't yet see? He turned over in bed, hugging his pillow, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and calm. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of an engine hummed, ordinary enough to ignore, yet persistent enough to make him glance toward the window. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet night was holding its breath, waiting for something unexpected. Somewhere beyond the streets he had walked, a response to his courage was already on its way, moving silently and deliberately, like the shadow of destiny itself. Ethan finally closed his eyes, drifting toward sleep, unaware that his ordinary life was about to intersect with something extraordinary. The events of the next day, the arrival of a sleek black SUV at his home, were already in motion. A day that had started like any other afternoon had set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of his life. All because a quiet, courageous boy chose to stand up for what was right. And as the night deepened, the stars outside his window twinkled faintly, almost as if they too were watching, waiting to witness the next chapter of his story unfold. The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside his window, the sun spilling golden light across his bedroom floor. It was the kind of quiet morning that made you feel the world was ordinary and predictable, and for a moment Ethan thought the previous day's events had been just that, ordinary. He got ready for school, ate breakfast with his parents, and even laughed at a joke his father told about a cat stuck on a fence. Life felt normal. Yet deep down, Ethan couldn't shake the lingering thought of the Parker couple, their grateful smiles, their words of appreciation. It had left him with a strange, restless energy, as if the universe had whispered that something unexpected was coming. He stepped outside to wait for the school bus, the morning air crisp and cool. That's when he noticed it. At first it was just a shadow moving across the driveway of his house, but then he realized it was a vehicle, sleek, black, and completely out of place in their quiet suburban street. The SUV sat there, engine running, tinted windows reflecting the sunlight in an almost menacing way. It didn't belong. Ethan felt a jolt of curiosity mixed with caution. Who could that be? He muttered to himself, his pulse quickening. He walked a few steps closer, peering from behind the hedge. Two men in suits sat inside, their faces serious, almost unreadable behind dark sunglasses. The air suddenly felt heavier, charged with a tension that made Ethan's stomach twist. He hadn't expected recognition, a reward, or attention. He had simply done what was right. And yet here was this vehicle, silent and imposing, waiting as if it had been sent for him. He ran back into the house, heart pounding, and called out to his parents. "Mom, Dad, there's a black SUV in the driveway. Two men are sitting inside." His mother peeked through the kitchen window, gasping softly. "Oh my goodness, Ethan, stay inside. Lock the doors." His father moved quickly, checking the locks on the front door while keeping an eye on the mysterious vehicle. Ethan's mind raced. Could it be someone looking for trouble? Or could it be related to the Parker couple? He didn't know what to think. The SUV's presence felt deliberate, almost like it had been waiting for him specifically. He glanced back at the car through the window. The men inside didn't move, didn't wave, didn't signal in any way. They just sat there silent and still, exuding a quiet authority that made Ethan's heart race even faster. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes felt like hours. The street was otherwise empty, the neighborhood quiet as if holding its breath along with him. Ethan's parents tried to stay calm, whispering reassurances, but he could see the tension in their eyes. There was something about the precision of the SUV, the way it had appeared exactly at that moment, that told him this wasn't a random coincidence. Finally, the driver's door opened slowly, and one of the men stepped out. He was tall, wearing a crisp dark suit, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that made it impossible to ignore him. He looked toward Ethan's window, raising his hand in a polite but formal gesture. "Are you Ethan Miller?" he asked in a calm, authoritative voice. Ethan nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Yes, I'm Ethan," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled faintly, just enough to be polite but not familiar. "My name is Mr. Lawson," he said. "I'm here on behalf of your neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Parker. They've spoken very highly of you." Ethan blinked, barely understanding. "On their behalf?" "Yes," Mr. Lawson continued. "What you did yesterday, defending them, did not go unnoticed. They wanted to express their gratitude personally. They've asked me to meet you and convey their thanks, and discuss something important regarding your future." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Gratitude? Something important? His mind spun with possibilities, none of them quite real enough to imagine. The SUV door opened wider, and the second man stepped out, equally formal and polite. Ethan noticed how coordinated they were, how professional, as if they had rehearsed every movement. He stepped back, unsure whether to approach. His parents stood behind him, watching cautiously, their faces a mixture of concern and awe. "Please," Mr. Lawson said, gesturing toward the SUV. "We mean no harm. We only wish to speak with you for a few minutes. You've made a difference in people's lives, Ethan, and that deserves recognition." His words, calm yet deliberate, made Ethan feel both nervous and excited. Recognition had never been his goal, yet it stirred something inside him he hadn't felt before. A quiet sense of anticipation, of destiny in motion. As Ethan stepped slowly toward the SUV, his thoughts raced. What could this possibly mean? Was it just a thank you or something bigger? He didn't know yet, but he felt a strange certainty that his life was about to change, that the ordinary days he had known were ending, and something extraordinary was beginning. For the first time, Ethan realized that a simple act of courage, something so small to him, could ripple outward in ways he never imagined. And standing there, facing the sleek black SUV and the men who represented the Parker family, he felt the weight of responsibility, the thrill of possibility, and the undeniable truth that bravery has a way of finding its own reward. The quiet street, the morning sun, and the ordinary houses around him suddenly seemed to fade into the background. All that mattered was this moment, the moment when courage met consequence, when kindness met recognition, and when an ordinary boy's life was about to take an extraordinary turn. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, staring at the two men in front of the sleek black SUV. His heart was still pounding from the surreal sight of the vehicle in his driveway. The polished black exterior glinting in the morning sun. Everything about the scene felt larger than life, as if he had stepped into one of the stories he used to imagine in his head. Stories where ordinary people suddenly became part of something extraordinary. But this wasn't a story he could control. This was real, and it was happening to him. The taller man adjusted his suit and removed his sunglasses, revealing a calm, friendly face. "Ethan," he said, his tone serious but gentle. "I know this is unexpected. Please don't be alarmed." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his racing thoughts. I'm not sure I understand," he said, his voice shaky. "Why are you here?" The man smiled faintly and gestured toward the SUV. "My name is Mr. Lawson, and this is Mr. Reed. We're here on behalf of your neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Parker." Ethan blinked, his memory flashing back to yesterday afternoon, to the grocery store, to their kind faces and grateful smiles. He remembered Mrs. Parker's trembling hand as she handed him the small pack of candy, Mr. Parker's soft words of thanks. He had never imagined their gratitude could extend this far. "They told us about what happened yesterday," Mr. Lawson continued. "How you defended them when no one else would. They spoke about it for hours, Ethan. They were deeply moved by your courage, by your kindness. and they wanted to make sure you knew how much it meant to them. Ethan's chest tightened. He had expected words of thanks, maybe a card, a small gesture. But this, a black SUV, two formal men showing up at his home, felt overwhelming, almost unreal. I didn't do anything special, he muttered. I just did what felt right. That's exactly why it's special, Mr. Reed said softly, his voice carrying warmth and sincerity. Most people wouldn't have acted. Most people would have walked away. But you didn't. You stood up for them when they needed someone, and because of that, they want to offer you an opportunity, one that could change your future. Ethan's mind whirled. Opportunity, future? What could they possibly mean? He stepped back instinctively, unsure whether he should feel excited or anxious. Opportunity? I don't understand, he said. Mr. Lawson reached into his briefcase and pulled out a neatly folded letter. This comes directly from Mr. Parker's family, he said. It's an offer for a scholarship, Ethan. A chance to further your education and pursue your dreams. They want to invest in you because they saw something rare in your actions. Integrity, bravery, and heart. These are qualities that can't be taught, and they believe in nurturing them. Ethan's eyes widened. A scholarship for him? His parents had always struggled to give him the best opportunities, and here was a chance that seemed almost too good to be true, coming from people he had barely known. His fingers fidgeted nervously as he glanced at the envelope, the Parker family crest embossed on the cover, giving it an air of elegance and importance. You see, Ethan, Mr. Reed continued, your one act of courage didn't just impact your neighbors. It created a ripple effect. They spoke to us because they wanted to ensure that your bravery is recognized and rewarded in a meaningful way. They want to help you reach your potential. Ethan's parents stepped forward now, having watched the entire interaction silently from the porch. His father placed a hand on his shoulder, eyes wide with pride. Son, this is incredible, he said softly. You've always been a good kid, but this is more than just doing the right thing. You're being seen, truly seen for who you are. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling a flood of emotions. Disbelief, pride, humility, and a strange sense of destiny. He thought back to the grocery store, to the fear and hesitation he had felt moments before stepping in. He remembered the gratitude in the Parker couple's eyes and the small, quiet thrill of knowing he had made a difference. And now all of that one afternoon, that one courageous choice, and had led to this moment. A moment that felt like a bridge between his ordinary life and something extraordinary. I don't know what to say, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. You don't need to say anything, Mr. Lawson said kindly. Your actions have spoken for you. Today you've learned that courage and kindness never go unnoticed, Ethan. Life has a way of rewarding those who act with integrity, even when it seems like no one is watching. And this is just the beginning. Ethan looked at the two men, at the black SUV, at the letter in his hands, and finally allowed a smile to spread across his face. It was a mixture of relief, wonder, and hope. A smile that carried the weight of the day's events and the promise of a future he had never imagined. And in that moment, he understood something profound. Bravery isn't about grand gestures or fame. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one else will. And sometimes the universe notices in ways more remarkable than he could have ever imagined. Ethan's quiet life had shifted irrevocably in the span of a single afternoon, and as he stepped toward the SUV ready to meet the Parker family and accept their offer, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known, a knowledge that his story, his courage and his heart had the power to shape not just his future, but the lives of others as well. The black SUV gleamed under the late morning sun, its polished surface reflecting the quiet suburban street in a way that made it seem almost like a symbol of something larger than life. Ethan stood on the porch holding the envelope from the Parker family tightly in his hands. His parents flanked him, their faces filled with awe, pride, and a hint of disbelief. Ethan's heart raced, but it was no longer with fear or uncertainty. It was with anticipation, a thrill that came from the knowledge that his courage had opened a door he never imagined could exist. Mr. Parker's son, who had sent the men to Ethan's house, stepped forward. He was tall and confident, but there was warmth in his eyes that immediately put Ethan at ease. Ethan, he began, his voice calm but full of meaning, your parents must be proud, and so are we. The courage you showed yesterday, stepping up for those who couldn't defend themselves, is rare. That act, small to you, carried weight beyond what you can imagine. Ethan's fingers fidgeted nervously with the envelope. He had expected thanks, maybe a handshake, but not this. Not a formal acknowledgement that felt like the universe itself had paused to take note of his choice. I just did what felt right, he said softly, his eyes meeting Mr. Parker's son's gaze. And that, the man said with a gentle smile, is exactly why it matters. You see, Ethan, true kindness and courage don't come with a warning or an expectation of reward. They exist quietly, like a seed. And sometimes, if the timing is right, that seed blooms into something extraordinary. Ethan's parents exchanged glances, pride swelling in their chests. His father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Son, it seems your small act has already created a ripple, he whispered. Ethan nodded, his chest tight with emotion. Then came the revelation. Mr. Parker's son handed Ethan a formal letter. This is a scholarship offer, he said. It's an opportunity for you to pursue your education, your dreams, and everything you've worked for. My parents wanted you to have this because they believe in what you stood for. They believe in you. Ethan's eyes widened as he unfolded the letter. Scholarship for him? He had never imagined something like this. Never dreamed that a single act of integrity could shape his future in such a profound way. His hand shook slightly as he read the words, realizing that his courage had not gone unnoticed, that it had been valued, honored, and rewarded in a way that felt both humbling and extraordinary. He looked up at the SUV, at the men who had brought him here, and finally at his parents. I don't know what to say, he murmured. His mother stepped forward and embraced him, her eyes misty. You don't have to say anything, she whispered. We're proud, Ethan. You've shown us and the world the power of doing what's right. The moments that followed were quiet but full of meaning. Ethan, his parents, and the two men shared stories, smiles, and laughter. For a while it felt as if time had slowed, allowing them all to savor the significance of the day. Ethan realized that this reward, the scholarship, the recognition, the future now open before him, was not the reason he had acted, but it was a reminder that goodness carries its own unseen power. Later, as the SUV pulled away, Ethan watched it disappear down the street, feeling a sense of completion but also anticipation. He knew that life would continue, challenges would arise, but he had learned something essential. Courage, kindness, and integrity are forces that can shape destiny, often in ways beyond imagination. That afternoon, Ethan returned to his room, holding the small pack of candy from Mrs. Parker, the scholarship letter, and the memory of the gratitude he had witnessed. He realized that the black SUV, the scholarship, and the formal recognition were symbols, tangible proof that doing the right thing, even in small ways, always matters. As he sat by his window, looking out at the fading sunlight over the quiet neighborhood, he understood a truth that would stay with him forever. Life rewards those who act with courage, not for recognition, but because integrity and kindness have their own invisible power. That afternoon, he had stepped into the grocery store as an ordinary boy. He would leave it as someone whose actions had rippled far beyond what he could see. Someone who had touched lives, inspired gratitude, and changed the course of his own destiny. From that day forward, Ethan became more than just a quiet boy from a small town. He became a symbol of courage, a reminder that even small acts of bravery have the power to transform lives. And in the quiet of the night, as he prepared for bed, he knew that the world had shown him something remarkable, that doing the right thing, no matter how small, always comes full circle. It wasn't the scholarship, the black SUV, or the recognition that defined the reward. It was the knowledge that his courage mattered, that kindness had a voice, and that even the smallest act could ignite a chain of extraordinary events. The true reward of a heart willing to stand for what is right.